When critiquing media, real-world events inevitably play a role in how you approach coverage. This past month, former coworkers have accused Aaron Ahaz of discrimination, gaslighting, and, well, just being a generally unpleasant person to work with. Of the three who have spoken out, one worked with Ahaz at Riot Games, and the other two are former Wonderstorm employees. It's important to note that given the backgrounds of these three women, that the matter of race and sexuality plays a role in the discrimination allegations. Deandra was a creative editor at Riot Games when Ahaz was brought on as a creative director. Lulu, also a former Riot employee, and Danica were with Wonderstorm from pretty much the beginning. Danica, the former social media manager, tweeted out the following. When I started there were 4 women, 3 of us queer women. Our voices were not heard when it came to discussions of women, discussions of LGBTQ+ characters, and sometimes even jokes were made in response to concerns. The men at the top constantly talked about how awful Riot was, but then treated women at the company like jokes, similar to so much behavior I've heard and read about from the Riot reports. It was really the worst I've ever felt at a job. Riot Games has been the subject of much discussion around its poor workplace culture since Cecilia D'Anastasio's report on the matter in August of 2018 via Kotaku. The legal end of this has recently met a $10 million payout from Riot for the class action lawsuit. Ahaz has since responded with 100% denial, while in the same breath admitting he's not a perfect person, which to me, when that's included in these sorts of statements, it always feels a bit redundant, but also a tacit acknowledgement of fault. As an outsider, I obviously don't know what exactly happened, but clearly multiple employees of Wonderstorm were so unhappy they decided to leave without necessarily having their next job lined up. I also find it rather sad that much of the fandom think that just because you aren't a paid writer on staff means you have zero creative input. Any writer who dismisses outside opinion is an arrogant hack. Any writer trying to tackle matters of LGBTQ representation who doesn't identify as such and dismisses voices from said group who offer lived experience is not only an arrogant hack, but a complete jerk too. Sadly, terrible workplace culture isn't uncommon in video games or animation. I believe it's important for anyone who considers themselves a critic or simply a fan of mediums with such issues to not put our heads in the sand, lest these problems persist. The Dragon Prince isn't just Ahaz's or any of the higher-ups' creation. It's everyone at Wonderstorm, for better and worse. The animator or production assistant who just wants to do their job and not have the success of their work potentially suffer because of the actions of another. It's Danica's and Lulu's. I want to discuss the good and the bad that comes as a result of more than any one individual. With all that said, what of The Dragon Prince Season 3? Well, I have to admit, I'm a little disappointed. Spoilers. It's no secret that much of the fandom expected Season 3 to come sooner than it did given the 5-month turnaround between Seasons 1 and 2. There was much speculation we would receive the third outing this past summer. We didn't, and then came the concern for the series' future as the news of Netflix's cancel-happy nature came about. Combined with Ahaz directly calling out Netflix on Twitter for a lack of promotion, fans became rightfully concerned. What I'm getting at here is a pervasive feeling I got from this entire season, actually. That Wonderstorm isn't certain how much longer Netflix is going to provide funding, and they wanted to wrap up as much as they could. In an attempt to do so, the end product spins its wheels through the fluff while the meaty material comes sporadically and mostly loaded in at the end. One of the biggest offenders in this regard is Soren's arc. Arguably the character who undergoes the most growth, Soren is doing his best Jaime Lannister impression, breaking free from a manipulative relationship and doing what he knows to be right. Unfortunately, the first 3/4 is spent reminding us how dumb Soren is. Like, very dumb. If you haven't gotten it, he's not smart. Like, the opposite of that, actually. He's a big old dummy. And oh, by the way, Soren is not very... Okay, Soren was never the smartest, but he wasn't always just a bumbling buffoon. He had nuance, the arrogant, highborn knight, the military leader who may not have earned his role through experience but nepotism, the snarky bully, and at times surprisingly empathetic. In any given scene, he wasn't so binary. But in Season 3, he's a complete comic relief Dumbo until the story calls for his ascension. Which, yeah, as someone who considers Jaime Lannister one of his favorite Game of Thrones characters, I love it. To have someone realize their status doesn't make up for their faults and then do their damnedest to make recompense can be really compelling, which makes his comedic incompetence more frustrating. He's by far the heart of these 9 episodes, and even being the one to motivate everyone into taking a stand against Viren. That they can no longer play nice, run, or take half measures when opposing an evil that came to power as a result of such. How he deals with his relationship with his father and the wrongs he's committed in service of that. It's genuinely some of the best characterization in the entire series. I have some similar issues with Ezran, who at the end of season 2 made the selfless decision to leave the rest of the journey up to Callum and Rayla. Then he returns home and sits upon the throne that was once his father's. But he's overwhelmed. Not only because he's been away for quite some time, but because he's a kid. He's struggling, and it's all quite compelling for a couple episodes. He chooses to break from conventional thinking and stand by his principles, recognizing his father wasn't a perfect leader despite his love for him. And then, he chooses to appease those seeking revenge by letting himself take Viren's place in prison while Viren takes the throne. Viren, mind you, was just in prison for treason. I thought I missed something, but I didn't. It's just an incredibly bad choice that kneecaps a character's development and then isn't even called out. Like, I get that the point of Viren being able to seize power and the masses largely letting him do it is a stand-in for real-world leaders. This is just so lacking. It's the broad strokes of the idea, and I'm left nodding along, like, yep, that's a thing. It's ripping from the headlines, but doing none of the work to interrogate the events further. Which brings us to Callum and Rayla. This is really where we can see how much of this season is superfluous. Callum has no real struggles other than his relationship with Rayla still, but we'll get to that. Rayla is now forced to see the fallout of her decisions back home, and once again, she struggles with self-worth. The weight of the past is such an integral theme to the Dragon Prince, and to see one of our more pure-hearted heroes have to grapple with such in a different way is rather interesting. She puts the sins of the past upon her shoulders with the intention of doing better, even if that means sacrificing herself. But in reality, Rayla needs to realize these are not her sins to be forgiven, that a better world comes when we stop letting the mistakes of the dead define us. Though this does get undercut a bit by the big reveal of her parents' fate. Then everything comes full circle when Ezran decides, no, actually, I need to get Zim to his mom. He then flies across the world Game of Thrones style, and wait a damn second, we're literally back to where we ended season 2. 6 episodes in, and what has actually been accomplished? At this point, I began to suspect much of season 3 would have been better served if it were condensed and added on to season 2. Maybe 4 or 5 episodes at the most would have done the trick. Instead, 9 episodes where a whole lot of it serves little purpose. So many illogical occurrences happening all along. For example, Rayla and Callum's encounter with Nyx, who uses a 100-foot dinosaur to make her escape in the middle of the desert, stomping all the while. Somehow the duo failed to notice this while being no more than 50 feet away. And again, no one ever bothers to say, hey, Ez, why did you just let Viren take the throne? You know, the guy who's clearly the villain. Although some people seem to have issues with comprehending that. I understand to some degree this is a cartoon with the intention of appealing to kids, but that doesn't mean it needs to so blatantly be unconcerned with its audience's intelligence. I mean, that's why Avatar: The Last Airbender is so beloved. Ironically, my takeaway from season 1 was that The Dragon Prince is an exceptionally written show, that it carries on the torch of the Avatar universe with weighty subject matter and a lovable cast despite the shaky visuals. And now the aesthetic design is the most consistent strong point while the narrative is less so. In prior seasons, Xadia has been built up as this spectacular place where magic essence is as prevalent as air. Numerous wide shots are deployed to make the world feel like an enormous and mystical fantasy setting. One of the best being the giant tree and its Pinocchio nose seeds, which are used for transportation. Even familiar locations are given an extra sense of scale and beauty. Meanwhile, the animation is more fluid than ever, imbuing each character with their own personality and making the well-choreographed action a joyous romp. Though that personality does fall flat as the humor becomes spottier. They trot out the old Sailor Moon transformation reference not once, but twice, then try to lean into Elf Callum after Human Raylo worked so well. Here though, it all feels more self-referential. Other jokes are taken a step too far, setting up a punchline, hitting it, and then trying to milk it one or two more times without earning it. One of my hopes was that they wouldn't proceed with the Raylan ship, that was heavily teased in Season 2. Unfortunately, the duo are now more than friends, and it's playing out exactly the way I feared. It's the standard romance found in media where the leading couple get together after much tension, have their low, then some big emotional display, and it's all lovey-dovey again. The fights come about as a result of misunderstandings and refusals to open up, like every bad rom-com. I've seen this 1,000 times before. Hell, I recently watched Mobile Suit Gundam 0083 Stardust Memory, and one of that show's biggest faults is having this all too common romance that amounts to cheap drama, stealing runtime from more interesting narrative beats. Largely, what concerns me with The Dragon Prince is long-term plans. What was the initial pitch? How many seasons and episodes are planned? How's that changed along the way in regards to what Wonderstorm wants, what the fans want, and what Netflix wants? Considering how this season wraps up, I don't see a world where we need more than another season or two at most. Even then, a 5th outing would probably be pushing it. But at some point, the writers had 7 seasons sketched out. They've also been fairly open with changes, Raylan being one such example. If the future of the series remains uncertain, what other compromises come about? Which is the reality of writing any story, especially in the business of Western television. I'm obviously not calling it quits just yet. I still think this is a solid, if notably more flawed season. Alongside She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, Hilda, and a few others, Netflix has a strong stable of original animation. And The Dragon Prince probably has one of the more passionate fan bases of them. So I hope Wonderstorm is given what they need to continue and finish in a fashion that lives up to the first 2 seasons. If you'd like to hear me talk about The Dragon Prince more, or explain why Korra is better than Avatar, like I teased in a previous video, then be sure to donate to my Patreon. $1 a month gets you access to some bonus posts. For example, me talking about whatever anime I've been catching up on, video games, movies, anything that isn't big enough for a video. You should also follow me on Twitter @WordsMaybe. And for everyone who has done such, I say thank you.